I think Amon is the most underrated Vault Hunter that gets a bad rap in Borderlands 4, especially when he is S tier at bossing, mobbing, and survivability while being able to spam infinite heavy ordnance ammo and infinite overshields. Mako's Buck here, and today let's go over the Infinite Ordnance Amon build. Ordnance Amon is going to revolve around a pretty even split between the blue skill tree and the red skill tree for the best results, while making use of the blue skill tree action skill and forge skill. Amon's blue tree comes with the forge skill Firewall, which is going to block incoming damage, but more importantly, it is going to give us 25% extra damage and 50% extra projectile speed when we fire through it. Blue Tree's action skill is Scourge, which gives us this big ice shield that absorbs frontal damage and eventually grants damage reduction. It also gives us the ability to launch cryo whips that still actually don't do too bad on this build despite not being built into them at all. Now let's dump some points into the Blue Tree, starting with 5 points into Scorched Kairos for a free 30% increase to ordnance damage and magazine size. Heading down from there will be Tail of the Comet, which grants us a 30% chance to apply a cryo status effect whenever we deal ordnance damage. Up and to the left from there is going to be 5 points into Wrath of Nature for a 37.5% increase in status effect application chance and cryo effectiveness. This percentage goes up to 75% when your action skill is active. And our last 5 points into the Blue Tree are going into Blackout for a 15% increase to Ordnance Damage's critical hit chance. Additionally, critical hits from direct ordnance damage will also apply shock. We're also set up so that whenever we deal shock damage, we deal incendiary damage, but we'll go over that on the Red Tree. Augment for this build is going to be Cryonic Thrum, which pulses every second, dishing out cryo damage to nearby enemies. We're also gaining 7 more blue points from our class mod that's going to give us 5 points for Primal Surge, which is going to give us a 30% chance to restore ammo whenever we apply a status effect. We're always applying a status effect, and this will replenish heavy ordnance ammo, and this is where the Infinite Ordnance name comes from. Our class mod is also giving us 2 points into Ballistic Bulwark, which is going to give us an overshield worth 6% of the ordnance damage dealt when we deal damage with an ordnance. These 2 skill nodes from our class mod is going to make it so we can constantly spam our heavy ordnance weapon, which in turn gives us an overshield. And now for the Red Tree with 5 points into What Burns Within for a 30% increase to incendiary damage. Like I said earlier, we're set up so that when we deal shock damage, we also deal incendiary damage, moving down from there with 1 single point into Gut Punch for a 10% chance to weaken an enemy per instance of ordnance damage. We only need to go 1 point because 3 points only ups your chance to weaken. It doesn't buff the percentage of the weaken itself, and 10% is still very high with the amount of damage we're dishing out. Whenever enemies are weakened, they deal 40% less damage and take 20% more damage. This lasts for 8 seconds, and weakened is also considered a status effect. To the left of Gut Punches, 5 points into Wield the Storm for a 35% increase to status effect damage and status effect duration. And down from there is 5 points into Bullet Storm for an increase in gun damage whenever we apply a status effect. Gun damage is increased by 7.5% per stack and can stack up to 5 times. Moving into the bottom right corner with 5 points into Catastrophe, like I said, we're set up so that when we deal shock damage, we're guaranteed to deal incendiary damage, and when we deal incendiary damage, we're guaranteed to deal shock damage. Catastrophe grants us up to 15% crit chance when we apply shock and 30% crit damage when we apply burn to an enemy. Over to the right is going to be 2 points into Dragon's Breath, which converts the next gunshot after taking out your ordnance to incendiary damage, which increases its damage dealt by 40%. This also allows us to move down with 3 points into Crackling Aegis and 1 point into Electrical Fire. Electrical Fire allows us to shock an enemy whenever we burn them and burn them whenever we shock them. Crackling Aegis is going to grant us more status effect damage and more ordnance damage the fuller our shields are, up to 24% extra damage for both. And our last 2 skill points are going to go into Burning Ramparts for an 8% increase to fire rate and status effect chance when shields are full. Specializations are going to be the best defense. Since we're set up with so much shield regen and overshield, we're going to take advantage of 30% extra damage dealt when full. And this is an ordnance build, so we're going with full spectrum arsenal, which lets our ordnance damage benefit from increases to gun damage. Fragmentation payload for a 5% increase to ordnance critical hit chance and 50% ordnance crit damage. Last specialization is mainly preference. I went into the zone as I ADS my heavy ordnance weapon to take advantage of the stacking gun damage and crit damage buffs. You could go into contamination for increased status effect application chance, although I don't think it is needed. You could also try out compounding afflictions or now with caffeine if you want to spam action skill more. Firmware for this build gets fun. I went with 2 Gadget Ahoy, which grants 20% increased ordnance damage with the 2-piece high caliber for an extra 10% gun damage, which applies to our ordnance damage, and a 25% increase to projectile speed. And the 1-piece Get Throwin for another 10% increase to ordnance damage. Your 4 weapons don't really matter all that much as you're going to be bossing and mobbing with your ordnance weapon. I will say that I went with 4 Maliwan weapons since I'm using a Maliwan Enhancement because I'm using a Maliwan heavy ordnance weapon. 4 notable Maliwan weapons for this build are Ohm I, Katgawa's Revenge, Sweet Embrace, and Plasma Coil. Now let's get into the gear, starting with the most important piece, and that is the ordnance slot. Our main ordnance for both mobbing and bossing is the Hailspike heavy ordnance. Hailspike is rolled with 2-shot that fires 2 projectiles at a time, and Merv, which spawns 3 orbs on explosion. We're pairing that with the Hot Shot Purple Maliwan Enhancement with Synthesizer for a 25% increased status effect damage on all guns with Maliwan parts. You'll want to try to go for a triple damage roll on this, but I wouldn't go crazy trying to get it. You'll deal a ton of damage even without the God roll. Rep kit is going to be the Shiny War Paint for a 30% increase to both rate of fire and movement speed on use, and that's being paired with Enrage for an additional 30% increase to all damage dealt. The class mod is going to be a Purple Forge Knight class mod with a +5 to Primal Surge and a +2 to Ballistic Bulwark. Much like the enhancement, you'll shoot for a triple damage roll, but this is just for min-maxing and is not needed to still melt anything. Last piece of gear is the only piece that will have a swap for mobbing and bossing, and that is the shield. For bossing, we're going with the Watts for Dinner shield with amp on it for a 150% increase to damage dealt on shield drain. And since we have 2 points into Ballistic Bulwark, you'll constantly be looping amp and shield regen. For mobbing, we're going with the Vagabond and Siphon rolled Super Soldier for movement speed gains, which is needed when you're mobbing with a heavy ordnance weapon. Just make sure both of your shields have the same firmware on it to make swapping easy. The play loop for this build is going to be drop firewall in front of the boss, but not directly on it. Pop your action skill, pop rep kit, pull out your heavy ordnance weapon, and hold down the trigger while ADSing. Just a reminder that this entire video is timestamped if you feel like you missed something or want to jump around. If you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and turn those notifications on. See you next time.